How's it going, Yankee fans? My name is Alex, and my co-host here, Ryan Garcia. And today we want to discuss the bullpen, right? There's a couple of issues in the bullpen right now. We're losing a couple players. We'll kind of review those, money we're saving. But ultimately, this Yankee team is going to need some support there. Losing Scott Efros at the end of the season to Tommy John surgery is a huge blow. We gave up some good young prospects for him. And right now we're kind of looking at the situation like we're not going to have him until maybe the playoffs. He probably will miss the whole season. So you can rule Scott Efros out of the equation. Michael King luckily managed to avoid Tommy John surgery. So that's a really good positive sign. But I do think that ultimately, we need more support there. We're losing Miguel Castro to free agency. We're losing, Chapman, obviously. We're losing Zach Britton and Chad Green. So it's four guys we're losing to free agency right now. Our primary arms, still retain Wandy Peralta, Clay Holmes. King should be back at some point early in next season. But, right now there's some openings. I guess my question for you is I know Greg Weissert probably will play a big role next year and Ron Marinaccio as well. But how confident are you in this bullpen, Ryan? How are you doing today, my friend?
I'm all right. I think this bullpen, in terms of what they have at the back end of that bullpen, as you mentioned, Peralta, Loizaga, Holmes, you feel really strong about that back end. Even the middle guys, you have Trevino, Marinaccio. And the back end of the bullpen, you look at it, you have options, Litke, Abreu, Weissert, King, as you mentioned. I think he's supposed to be back by opening day. Or by spring training, excuse me, if I read reports wrong. I'm pretty sure that's what I've read. And then you also have, some guys like Steven Ridings coming back from injury, right? That's a guy that, really excited a lot of Yankee fans towards the end of 2021, has really good stuff, great fastball, a really nice slider, is a big swing and miss guy, is going to be a guy who I imagine, takes a leap forward at some point if he's ever able to stay healthy. But that's kind of the key for this bullpen. This bullpen, as you mentioned, suffered a plethora of injuries. And not to say this bullpen isn't deep still, but this bullpen used to have this kind of impeccable, almost this, unstoppable amount of depth that you could just, these guys, they were optioning Ron Marinaccio and Clark Schmidt throughout the season routinely. That's how deep that bullpen was. Domingo Germán, another guy who only got a shot because the Yankees traded Montgomery and Montas was hurt for a little bit, and Severino was also hurt. So, it took the Yankees losing 2 of their 5 opening day starters in Severino and Montgomery, one of them by trade, one of them through injury. It took the Yankees losing, as you mentioned, Chad Green. Aroldis Chapman effectively wasn't injured, but he was a no-show. Losing, as you mentioned, King, who they relied upon heavily, Efros, who they traded for. Marinaccio was hurt for a while. Right. So these are guys who are impact pitchers. They lost Holmes for a bit. Loizaga, they had an IL stint. Peralta had an IL stint. I could go down the list of these guys. And I think Trevino's the only, he was here for, Wicky's probably the only one that was here for a full season and didn't hit the IL from what I can remember from this bullpen. And somehow they still managed to have a really strong one. So it speaks to this team's depth at that position. Would I like to see them go out and sign a guy? Yeah, but no one like crazy, just some depth. I don't want them to go out and spend a lot of money on this bullpen. I don't think it's a part of this team that I look at and say that this needs to find an uplift. I look at the lineup. I would rather have an uplift there. If I'm going to spend, $10 million on a pitcher, I'll get a back end starter to help me fill out my rotation a little bit and get some innings in there, some veteran innings. If I look at the middle of my lineup, I don't think the middle of my lineup's too great without Aaron Judge, and I think I need another outfielder in there, maybe throw in another, maybe some infield depth. There are a lot of other places to spend money on this team. But next year, it has to be health, because if they have a plethora, a flu of injuries like this, I don't know how they're going to substand that next year, because this year everyone got hurt.
Yeah, they're saving a little bit of cash from those 4 guys that I mentioned earlier that are walking. So you have Chapman, $18 million you're saving right there. Zach Britton, $13 million you're saving. Chad Green, $4 million. And then you obviously have Miguel Castro. I think it was at $2.6 million. So that's a pretty nice chunk of change that you can flip over into pretty much the entirety of Aaron Judge's contract will be paid for from those 4 guys leaving. So, you could look at it that way, but at the same time, you're right. Like, they do have an extraordinary amount of depth in that bullpen. I think that maybe they want to add another lefty. Lucas Litke, he's okay. He's an innings filler. If you're winning by a lot, if you're losing by a lot, you throw him out there, he'll carry you 3 innings and not give up too much damage. But, Peralta is your primary lefty arm. Losing Chapman, you probably want to go get another lefty guy and Britton as well. So I wouldn't be surprised if they look for someone like that, more of a situational guy that can take some pressure off of Wandy, because at the end of the day, he's one of our better guys, and we're going to need him down the stretch next season. We need him during the postseason healthy and ready to go. So I think, getting another lefty that can kind of take that stress off of him, and the reliability can improve in that sense. So that might be something they look to do. But are there any young guys that you're looking to take a big step forward next year? I think Marinaccio, Greg Weisser are two that I look at as like, okay, those guys could be, significant pieces of the bullpen. But is there anyone that you're like, these guys are going to step up, these guys got to fill a big role and make it so the Yankees don't have to overspend or do anything drastic to acquire any more bullpen arms?
Yeah, so I mentioned writings before, but I'll kind of pivot off that because I think a lot of people would also mention writings. I think a lot of people forget Deivi Garcia is 23 years old. He's 23, right? Has he struggled in AAA mightily starting wise? Yes. Has he had success at the major league level before? Yes. Has he, is he kind of a wild card here? Absolutely. Like, do I look at this kid and say, I'm going to bank on him to be that extra reliever? No, but do I think he can step up and do a job? Absolutely. Right. Again, it's tough because this is a young kid and he's still 23, but I mean, pitchers, progression, I think, isn't always linear. I think a lot of people forget, it's not always a forward. You're not always taking steps forward in your progress as a pitcher or as a baseball player. Sometimes you're just taking steps backwards in order to go back up, right? Sometimes, you have those ups and downs in your development as a pitcher. But Deivi had some added velocity during spring training that I really liked. I was kind of shocked the Yankees never looked at him to pitch at all. I know he had an injury during the season, but looking at Stuff Plus specifically, he had a 107.2 during spring training. Small sample size, of course, but it stabilized pretty quickly. In terms of last season, he was at a pretty pedestrian Stuff Plus. His fastball was, his Stuff Plus was 86.8, so well below average. That's 14 points roughly, worse than the average pitcher in terms of velocity, movement, all that stuff. And then shooting up, and now you're 7 points better than average. That's a velocity increase. His fastball gets a lot of ride. He gets behind his fastball a lot. His curveball and slider are pitched at tunnel very well off the fastball. I look at this kid and I say, he may not be able to develop the pitches necessary to be a starter, to go, two times, 3 times through an order. But can this kid go out and give you, face 4 or 5 batters an outing? Absolutely. Right. And I think the Yankees are going to try to look at Deivi next year. I think the Yankees are going to give him a shot in spring training to kind of, put himself out there. And I think this is a remarkably talented kid. I think a lot of people, again, forget this kid is talented. He's still young. He added velocity. If he was seeing 94, 95 in spring training, you get a 94, 95 mile per hour fastball out of his arm slot, very much up, down, very much a shorter guy. So it's a little deceptive. And then getting that, that riding action, right? I wouldn't be shocked, right? Again, there are plenty of starters that have struggled at the major league level or at the upper levels of the minors, and it took them a while to figure it out. This isn't a 27-year-old, this isn't Chance Adams being 25, 26 and struggling. This is a 23-year-old kid, right? Look at Nestor. Nestor never put it together until he was 26. Never put it together. Was terrible at every major league level he played at until that year, right? This is a kid who I think is too talented to give up on, and I think he's going to have a successful 2022 if given the opportunity to, and he stays healthy, of course.
That's an interesting take. So Deivi Garcia, kind of making that jump to the majors. Of course, he had some experience in the past, but kind of, I guess, took a step back this past year or two. So I'm curious to see how the Yankees kind of approach this. Maybe they just go and rely on their youngsters. It's interesting though, because it seems like they're more willing to rely on their younger players in the pitching department than they are willing to rely on their young infielders. You know what I mean? Like, what is it with not relying on Peraza? What is it, Volpe? I wonder how they approach that next. Oswaldo Cabrera obviously was pulled up and he had an impact, but it seems like they're very willing to rely on those young bullpen arms like Marinaccio, like Greg Weisser, but the infield, they're not willing to do it. So it's kind of interesting. I wonder what the difference is. Maybe they just feel as though they were more prepared, or, it's easier for bullpen arms to come in and make an impact. Whereas, infielders are, definitely a little bit need more experience or need more time to get at bats and whatnot. Just be a totally different mentality in general. But, I feel you on that. I feel pretty confident that the Yankees bullpen is going to be just fine. They're clearing a lot of money off the books on guys that just weren't contributing, right? Like none of those guys were like that great. Chad Green was knocked out early in the season. Chapman was absolutely disgraceful. Zach Minton pitched less than 1 inning, and Miguel Castro was a net negative by most accounts at a +4 ERA. So, when you're looking at this, I can see them bringing back Castro on a pretty cheap deal, and just keep going with him and just give him another opportunity. But I know you're a big Albert Abreu fan. So, what are your thoughts on Abreu? Do you think that he could make an impact next year and that they should keep him around?
Yeah, so Albert Abreu is someone I think a lot of Yankee fans grew very tired of towards the end of that stretch. He pitched in high leverage moments and he didn't come up clutch. And I don't want to sit here and say that a pitcher struggling in those high leverage moments means absolutely nothing, but I will say I think it means less than some people consider it to be. We saw this with Chad Green where, he had a whole stretch last year towards the end of the season. He was terrible. I mean, in big spots, you couldn't trust him in a big spot. And it came out of nowhere. It's not like this dude doesn't have the makeup for it, right? It's not like he's like a crumbler or like he stinks. Or remember in the 9th inning, you couldn't close Chad Green last year. That was a whole issue where the Yankees could not close Chad Green. Throw him in the 7th inning with bases loaded and no one out, he'll get you out of it. Throw him in the 9th inning with no one on and no one out, and he'll blow the game, right? It was a weird anomaly. It wasn't a mental thing. It was an anomaly. And I think that's the same situation we're looking at with Abreu here, right? His ERA was strong with the Yankees. His FIP was strong with the Yankees. He struck out a lot of dudes with the Yankees. He didn't walk a lot of guys with the Yankees. It's a big thing right there. He found the strike zone. His sinker is a pitch that I think is a really strong pitch. Comes at 98.5 miles an hour. Batters have a negative launch angle against it. They only hit 259 with a 296 slugging. So whenever they do hit it, it's a weak single. His slider is very elite, 45.1% whiff rate, 125 average, 250 slugging. The four-seam fastball and the changeup are not great pitches, but those are also pitches he doesn't really use much. And it's also possible with his fastball, it's just being misread as a fastball instead of as a sinker. But ultimately, he has at least two very strong pitches in the sinker and slider, which I imagine he'll lean on more. You would think that those two pitches don't do well against lefties. They actually perform very well against lefties. He's actually a better pitcher against lefties than he is against righties this year, which is an interesting thing to look at considering, it's a sinker slider that typically performs better against the same hand, would be righties. So Abreu is someone I look at as a good, stable, just throw him in the back end of your bullpen. And you're going to be really happy with the results you get. And I think the upside's very high too. If he goes out next year and he puts the same ERA, but it's in better, higher leverage moments, right? He kind of comes through in these high leverage situations. He goes from a guy who you put as an afterthought to a guy you rely upon in the postseason potentially. And I'm surprised he didn't make the postseason roster. I'm surprised he didn't get a little look. I'm surprised about that because I think he's very good. But I think, he's on the 40-man, doesn't have any minor league options. He's either going to be traded or he's going to be on the major league team next year. So it'll be interesting to see what the Yankees do with him in the offseason because I think he's very good.
Yeah, so guys, I'd love to hear your perspectives on this bullpen. Do you feel confident in them? Scott Efros losing him for the season definitely sucks. King should be back for opening day, which is definitely a great sign. But I'm pretty confident these young guys are going to take a step forward and really help this team. Arenacchio showed us what he can do as a rookie. Greg Weissert as well. So always happy to hear your opinions, narratives, and perspectives below in the YouTube comments. As always, make sure to like and subscribe. Enjoy the start of your week. Once the World Series is over, free agency is going to start ramping up here, and we got you guys covered with all the relevant news, everything, and the rumors and speculation. It's going to be a fun offseason. The Yankees have a lot to do. There's a lot of work left to be done, so it should be exciting at the very least. But enjoy the rest of your day, my friends. We'll catch you guys on the next Fireside Yankees episode.